Welcome csc200 to ex4, Presidents Foreign Key, or Presidents FK. And this should be the last exercise that we're working with the Presidents table. We'd like to move on beyond the Presidents database. And for this one, we're going to create a table. We're going to insert data into the table. And I'm going to have some of that started for you so you don't have to do a whole lot of typing. And we're going to do our first join. So we're just going to do a little bit more with our table that we're getting familiar with before we move on to something else. So you can work on your same console. If you have your console here, you can use it. You don't have to close out of it. There's nothing wrong with just kind of moving on. So I'm going to do that right now. So I'm just going to hit return a whole bunch of times. And I'll do Control L just to kind of clear out what I have to start at the top. And again, we're going to try to work on a separate file. So I'm going to go over here, and where it has files, I'm going to right click and say open a new tab and make sure I have a separate file open. Now, one thing you'll notice in your databases is there's my working code, and I'm going to make a new one so that it's kind of cleaner. I don't have all the code from the last exercise, so I'll make a new file, which isn't a problem. There's also a VP list text file in here that we're going to use so that you could put your vice presidents into your table from this file so you don't have to go and find all that stuff. So I put that in there already. You don't have to upload it. You don't have to go and find it and get it from my warrant. It's already going to be there. So I am going to make a new file here. So I'm just going to call it Pres FK. I'm still going to use working code. I know that's kind of wordy, but then when I see it, I know it is working code right away. So I don't confuse it with anything else. So Pres FK working code.sql, and I'll just make a new file, and that'll open it as a new file. And it's all ready for me to start working here. And again, you can always start off and kind of view your database if you want to, just to make sure everything's okay. And I'll do that to start. And I'll type it in here, and it's select all from presidents. And I'll just do that first, just to get things started here, especially if you just logged in. And there it is. It took a little while to get going, but everything's there. And on our last exercise, we updated that to 8.0. On this exercise, we're going to put Trump in here, and then we're also going to make sure that we have his vice president in with the vice presidents, but we're going to do that last. We're going to get our vice presidents together before we deal with adding Trump to this. So that'll be another thing that we're going to do to this table. So I'll just hit return again. So everything's there. Actually, one thing I just want to double check. Remember that now you should be working with last name instead of president. If you did the last exercise, it should be last name like that. And we're going to change this scheme a little bit. Instead of using these capital letters, we're going to use underscores. We're going to try to do that from now on. That's more accepted than using this kind of camel case with capital letters and things like that. We'll try to keep everything lowercase. That just makes life easier. And then we'll use underscores in between things. So we're going to do that even with our vice presidents. Even though it's a little inconsistent between the two, we're going to try to do that and just get some practice at doing that. So I'll go here again and just keep hitting return and start from scratch with Control L. Now the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to create a new table for vice presidents. So we're going to create the table first, and then we're going to insert the vice presidents into the table. So I'm going to go to W3 Schools, and we'll just check out what this looks like, and we're going to look for Create Table. And here's Create Table. And that just gives us an idea of what the syntax looks like. And here's the syntax here. It's probably easier to work with one that has data in it. Now we're going to add some things to this, but we could certainly start with this. And I'll just copy this, and I'll use it in my working code for now. And remember to change these, because it's going to be create table, and we're going to call it vice presidents, and we're going to do everything lowercase. So we have vice presidents, just like that, with an underscore. And I'm going to go back here and look at a couple things too, because we're also going to use a primary key. And I just want to show you there's a couple ways to put in a primary key. We're going to have an ID, except we're going to use lowercase. It's going to be an int. It's going to be not null. So it's going to look something like this. And we could put primary key here, or we could do primary key down at the bottom. I'll show you there's different ways to do primary key. And then we're also going to do a foreign key, which means that's the one we're going to share from the president's table. So we're going to look at a couple things here to see how to do this. And this one has a foreign key. Actually, the one with the foreign key is probably better to start with. So I'm going to use the one with the foreign key and copy this, even though I started the other one. And that may be a better template to work from to start. And I'll just paste that right over. And again, we're not going to use orders, vice presidents, and I'm going to have something called VP ID. It's going to be a VP ID. Now that's going to be the ID for this table. We are going to have a foreign key from the president's table. That's going to be this, and we'll get down to that. We also need to put in the data we need in here. We don't need order number, so that's not one we need. We're going to put in first name, and we're not going to put a lot in here because we just want to get some practice, so we don't need to make it that complicated. And first name is going to be varchar, and I'll just do 20, and you could do that in caps or not. And now that I have this one, I'm going to copy this. And this one will be last name. And we're going to have first name, last name. And then the only other thing we're going to have is going to be our foreign key, which is going to be called pres ID. We're going to call it pres ID. And you could still put int here. You could still put the data type. And some of these things I'm going to fix here. I'll just put caps because that's the way we've been doing them. It's going to be int, not null. We're also going to do something like auto increment. We're going to use auto underscore increment. And that's going to create a number for us just for that table, for the vice president's table. And we'll just start it at 1. And it doesn't matter that much what the number is, but that's just for that table. So we're going to do that. And we could put primary key here, or you could have primary key down here. Since this is getting long anyway, I'm going to put primary key down here, and the primary key is going to be VP ID. So this is the primary key of this table, VP ID, and it's going to be created with an integer. It's not going to be null, so we're going to have something in there. And it's going to auto increment, meaning it's going to be auto numbered, so we don't have to put any number in there when we create it and when we insert data. So it's going to be auto incremented starting with 1, and that's what it starts with by default. And then, so we're going to have 3 columns here. First name, last name, pres ID, and pres ID is going to be the foreign key. So that's where this last one comes in, and it says foreign key, and our foreign key is going to be pres ID. We're just saying once again that that's what the foreign key is. Pres ID is the foreign key, and then we're going to say references, and that means where is it coming from? It's coming from the president's table, and the column from the president's table is ID. So whatever that ID was from the original table. So this is the foreign key right here. This is where it's coming from. But when we see it in this table, it's going to be called pres ID, but it's going to be referencing that data that's coming from that original table. So here we're just saying VP ID is our primary key, and this is our foreign key. So we're going to have, in a sense, 4 columns. I said 3, but we're going to have our ID for presidents. For the vice presidents, we're going to have first name, last name, and then our foreign key that's referencing the president. So for each vice president, it will indicate what president he served under. And if it was somebody who served under more than one president, we're actually going to put another record for that. At least for now, that's the way we're going to handle it instead of trying to figure it out right now. So that's what we're going to do first. This is creating a table. A couple things just to point out. We're saying create table, and now I don't need this space here, but we're putting everything in parentheses. That's why we have a starting parentheses and an ending parentheses, and we have our semicolon ending the whole statement, the whole block. And then we have commas in between each column. So our first column is this one where it has int, not null, auto increment. And you could have primary key there, but we're putting it down here. And then there's a comma, and then it's first name, and then the data type, which is varchar, which could be in all caps. Then there's last name with varchar, which again could be in all caps. And then this one is int. Now we don't have to put a lot of information about this because it's just pulling from the other table, but we're still putting the data type here. And then we're indicating a primary key, and that one's just pointing to that. That's just pointing to that and saying, hey, that's our primary key. And then the foreign key, this is basically just declaring that pres ID, which is right here, is going to be the foreign key, and it's going to reference that. So we're all ready to go here. So we're going to copy this, and you can even save this, and we'll see what happens when we paste it and run it. I'm not sure what happened there when I was pasting it, but now it looks okay because this is what I want. So I'm going to hit enter, and it says query okay, 0 rows affected. And the only way we're going to know what happened, we're not going to have anything in there yet, but we should have a table there. So let's just do a show tables and make sure that we see that it's there. And there we have a president's table, our original one, and there's our vice presidents. So we have our tables, so we're good. And you could even describe and see the columns in that, but we should be okay right now. So we're going to move on, and I'll move on to start inserting data in there. Now to insert data, we could go to W3 Schools and look for insert into. And here's insert into. And we're going to look for something that's going to give us an idea of how it should look. Now you can see it's going to say insert into. It's going to have the table name. Now last time I said you had to take out the space. I guess you could have the space there. Then we're going to have values, and we're going to have that. with all our values that are going to be in there. So this will be a little tricky, so let's just see what happens here. We're going to insert into, let's just copy this and start working on it. Now we're going to be inserting into vice presidents, and if you're unsure about any of this, just copy it so that you don't mess it up. So it's going to be inserting into vice presidents, and then if you want to, hit return here and do a tab or something like that, you can do that. And then we're even going to put values on separate lines, so we could break this up a little bit. And what we're going to put into vice presidents, if you remember, based on the columns, it's going to be the VP ID. So I'll copy that and put that here. That'll be the first column. Actually, I don't need to do that. Because that's auto increment, we don't need to do it. So we can actually skip that. And then we're going to use first name. So that'll be the first one, first name. So again, just to repeat, we don't need to put the value in here. We don't need to insert any kind of value for the ID if we're auto incrementing. So that's why we're skipping over that. And we'll just go right here with, I didn't mean to call that last name, but since I already did, I have to stay with it. And I didn't mean to do that. I might have to change that later, but I didn't mean to call it last name. It should just be last name. But since that is the column name right now, I have to keep it in there until I change it. And obviously it'll be good practice to go back and change it. And then we're going to have the Pres ID. So these are the columns. So we're going to insert into vice presidents and into these columns. That means if we have 3 here, we should have 3 here. Now, what we're going to put in here, I have something for you so we don't have to go through that. What we normally have, just for example, if you're going to do something like Mike Pence, if you're going to do the newest vice president, if you're going to do Mike Pence, you might do something like this. Now, you would have to know the ID of the president. We have to put in president ID. That's not just going to be done automatically for you. You have to put it in so that you match it up correctly, because we're doing data entry right now. And that would be 45, and that's the way we would do it. So that's the way, if we basically inserted Mike Pence into this table, this is what would happen. And I could just try this right now. I'm actually going to try this, because you know what I think I'm going to do? I'm going to make a new table. I'm going to drop the table and make a new table, because I hate that I have this name here, because that bothers me. So I'm just going to throw in Mike Pence for now. We're going to drop the table anyway, so it won't matter. So let's just see if this works. Our insert into and our values. And let's just make sure that we're following this. There's no comma over here. There's a semicolon here. So I think everything looks okay as far as the way we're doing it. And let's see how this works before I go back and drop the column. So I'm going to try this out and see if we get a table with Mike Pence in there. Now, actually, we're going to get an error. Actually, I can't even do this. Let me do another one. I won't be able to do this because if it's a foreign key, it won't match up 45 to anything, because there's no 45 that's in our table right now. So let's just put 44, even though that's incorrect. But we know we have a 44 in there, so I'm just going to do that right now, just to get this to work. I don't mean to be doing this wrong, but since I'm going to change that name, I'll do that. So I'll go here, and I'll just see how this works, and I'll hit enter, and it worked. So let's just see what it looks like just for now, just to try it out. And it's vice presidents is the name of the table. But let's just see what all the vice presidents look like. And there it is. We have Mike Pence, and he's 44. So everything's working out okay except this last name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and say, how do I drop a table? I'm going to drop a table. And I'm going to go look for the database stuff, and they have drop database. We don't want to do that, but they have drop table. And we're going to drop the table and just do it over because we have the code to do it over. So I'm going to do that. So I'm just going to say drop table, and I'll just copy this from the drop table. And it's not going to be shippers, it's going to be vice presidents. So let me just drop this table. So that way we know how to drop the table. If you ever mess it up, just drop it and start over. And if you have the code here, it's not that hard to do. That way I could go back and then I could fix this and just take the name out of here and make it go back the way it was. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to drop the table, and it says it's okay. And then if I just say show tables, I should just see one table. Good. I dropped the table, so now I'll go fix what I just screwed up so I don't have to keep doing that with that last name thing. And since I'm going to do this over, since I just dropped the table, this would be a good place to take a break. So we'll pick this up with part 2 of our video after dropping the table and then kind of rebuilding it again.